Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR. I've got a lot to talk about going on in the Big Ten. It's Thursday night instead of our normal Tuesday night because unfortunately I had some car trouble last Tuesday. Tire had to be changed, all that good stuff. You don't want to hear about it, but we are here tonight to deliver our Big Ten versus SEC head coach rankings. I always knew I wanted to do a show like this, but I never got around to it, and I'm excited to do it tonight with my friend and your friend Zach Guggenheim. Zach, how you doing tonight?
I'm good, Trojan. It's good to see you on the chat.
There we go.
I I'll be honest, I am kind of dreading tonight a little bit
Uh-oh.
because I tried to make these rankings and I was ready to go and to defend them on Tuesday. And you know what happens with 48 hours to think?
You changed them?
I didn't change them, but I disagree with myself. I'm going to stick with my picks, but then I'm going to waffle a bit because hindsight's 2020. So I'm just that's my caveat. So just laying it out there. But I'm glad that you got the tire changed. I'm glad that it wasn't, more serious than that. But I don't know about you. I feel like when a tire blows, it's like the biggest, most annoying thing because it's like, it's not a big deal. It's almost like a rite of passage. And yet at the same time, it derails a lot of things. And so I feel for you.
Yeah, I was annoyed because I was on my way to get dinner. And so obviously, I was hungry and annoyed at that. So that was the most annoying. But then number two,
were you hangry?
I'm angry, yes. But number two, actually, more than anything, I was just thankful that it wasn't snowing out because that would have been really the worst. So the fact that it was 60 some degrees and just barely getting dark yet, I was like, oh, okay, this is somewhat manageable, but I'm definitely not going to make it home in time for the podcast. So that part stunk, but albeit we are here. We got our even though we're on Thursday night, you guys are still here. We appreciate it. Pit Snipe Husker, hey all, hey Pit Snipe, we appreciate you being here. And Billy Tuesday, as always, we appreciate you being here. Billy Tuesday says, hey gents, he says, who's the best coach and why is it Day?
Fair question.
You didn't have Day number one in yours, did you?
No.
Yeah, I still had Kirby above him.
Yeah.
But Billy, I love your confidence, and if I was embracing more of my Ohio State homerism, I probably would have put Day. But I try not to be a homer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
But I mean, I think it's probably obvious where he is on both of our lists.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's not far from one.
No, not at all. Not at all. Pit Snipe Husker says car stuff is the worst. I guess this is what I'm doing today. Yeah. Thankfully it was not an all-day project, but yeah, when car stuff comes up, it's basically taking your entire day, especially if you're like me and you don't work on cars for a living. So you're watching YouTube videos as you figure it out. So, all right. Well, enough of that. In addition to our Big Ten head coach rankings, we have some other news items we want to talk about. Before we get there, number one, if you know who Norby Williamson is, a story was about him. He has to do with ESPN. I think it's an interesting story, and it does attribute a little bit to the trashing of the SEC that you all so much enjoy. So I think you'll like that. In addition to that, Jed Fish has Fish. However you pronounce his last name, he has some issues with kickoff times. Zach and I will discuss that. And then Ari Wasserman put out a list of teams that are facing pivotal seasons in 2025. Zach and I will discuss the Big Ten teams that are on that list and if there should be any more added to it. All right.
Speaking of pivotal,
okay,
that comment that John just made, pivotal. We need to talk about it.
We do. I'm waiting for June or something, when there's literally no news out there and it's just we're getting on here for fun more than anything else. But yeah, the wrestling, I was almost thinking we should do a tournament bracket instead of rankings.
Ooh.
I guess we'd have to rank them first so that way we could seed them,
there's an off chance. It's a very off chance. But there could be an off chance that we could actually get Brett Bielema and Lane Kiffin to actually do it for real.
Yeah. No, Brett would definitely do it. Lane would not.
Yeah. You don't
Lane
think?
would go on Twitter and be like, "They want me to wrestle,"
That's fair. That's a good point.
and Brett
But
would be like, "I'm willing to do it. Come on."
Yeah. John says yes. Bracket. I think
There we
yeah.
It's March. Everything you do has to be a bracket in March. That's the rule.
Yeah. I'm still in my feelings about the Big Ten tournament right now. So
here we go. John has a great idea. Polls for seeding.
Oh,
that's what we'll do. We'll put out a poll.
That's
a really good idea, John.
John Casserman.
He would. He would. We'll have to do it with the Big Ten first and then involve the SEC just so we can see how much the Big Ten coaches crush the SEC coaches. So, all right. Anyway, we got a lot to get to tonight, and I am going to be partially watching basketball as we are on because I am doing an After Dark tonight with Ryan from Sports Chat 513, I think it is. He's an Oregon fan, so we'll be talking about the Oregon-Indiana game for sure, and then all the other games. But while I watch the Purdue game tonight, we are going to be doing this podcasting and talking about the football stuff. So, Zach, you ready to get into some Norby Williamson?
Let's talk about the Norbster.
All right.
Let's do it.
So, if you're not aware, Norby Williamson, he is a former high-level executive for ESPN. He was there for like 40 years. I'm pretty sure he got hired in like 1985. So he's been there a very, very long time. He's not been so much in the financials as much as he's been in like the content creation and stuff like that. So if there is some kind of SEC bias, which I believe there is, I think you believe most people believe there is, coming from ESPN, Norby would have been one of the people orchestrating for that to happen. Well, Norby Williamson got into a fight with, not like a fist fight, into kind of like a word spat with Pat McAfee last year. I think it was in April when that happened. If you recall, Pat McAfee came out and said that he didn't like that ESPN executives were trying to tell him what to do and what to say. He specifically named Norby Williamson, and Norby either got fired or left. I heard somebody say fired today. I heard somebody say resign. I can't remember for sure, but for whatever reason, he left. Sounded like it was at the very least mutual, and so he left. Well, Norby took a job after that at FanDuel. So FanDuel is starting to make their own sports media department, mostly for professional sports, but they are kind of dabbling in every area. And Norby Williamson, one of his first big moves was just this week. He went to ESPN and essentially stole a number of executive and content staffers at ESPN, about 10 of them, to come over to work with him at FanDuel instead. Now, there are 4 big names. We don't need to go through all the big names. Like, the names don't really matter to you guys. If you want to look them up, look them up. But there are 4 big name people that will be running certain sports and stuff like that. But the most important thing here that I find most interesting is that we are seeing a sports media group, a sports media channel, whatever you want to call it, actively trying to go up against ESPN right now. Norby Williamson didn't, go get all these people from ESPN just to go have kicks and giggles and, drink coffee together. Like, they are trying to build something very big at FanDuel. Fox has tried to battle with ESPN before in the past, but it's pretty much just turned into they take the people ESPN doesn't want anymore. Like, they signed Skip Bayless, but ESPN didn't really want Skip Bayless anymore. And so, like, that's kind of what Fox News was. Now, for one of the first times I've ever seen, we are seeing a company go take ESPN people from them and try to create a competent, competitive network, media group, whatever you want to call it. Zach, I know this is a loaded question, and I know you're probably not super deep in the weeds of all this stuff, but from your perspective, outside looking in, could you see FanDuel creating a sports media network that could at some point combat with ESPN?
It's a loaded question. There's a sidebar comment here, or sidebar discussion at some point, which is the ethics of this, like a betting site owning a sports media company. That just feels not good, like not kosher. But that's another
Well, and I will say, like this, they are essentially trying to make what ESPN Bet was, right?
Yeah.
Or still
Which
is.
also feels not kosher.
Right. Correct.
So yeah.
They're
Anyway,
they're just going about it differently because they established, and you and I mean, we're not really in this field a lot. Neither you or I bet all that much. I don't bet at all. I don't know how much
no,
you do, but
I don't.
yeah, so neither of us bet at all. But the interesting part is ESPN created the sports media, network, that kind of stuff first, and then tried to put the betting on top of it. It's not gone very well. ESPN Bet is absolutely tanking if you look at the numbers. And then now FanDuel, what they did is they completely created the betting infrastructure, and now they're trying to build a sports media group based off of that. It's kind of
Mhm.
interesting the way these things are working. But anyway, back to the question for you. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting because do I think that another sports media company can compete and maybe overtake ESPN? I mean, I think we've already kind of seen it in different avenues with Fox, NBC, and CBS. ESPN still has the market on, I think, the major, like the playoff, obviously the SEC, they have rights to the ACC. And so they still have a big piece of the pie. But I think ESPN, if I'm honest, has done a terrible job at who they have wanted, quite honestly. And so they have become like, we've joked a little bit about my affection for professional wrestling a couple times, but in some ways, ESPN is kind of becoming the WWE of sports media. Like the reason why Norby Williamson is out is because of Pat McAfee. And like, no offense, like I think Pat McAfee's entertaining, but that kind of tells you where their priorities are, right? They keep Desmond Howard over David Pollock. Why? Like that makes zero sense. David Pollock is a knowledgeable guy who is entertaining, but he knew his stuff. Cue stupid laughter by Desmond, right? So I think ESPN has already made a lot of personnel mistakes because of the direction they're going. And I think what FanDuel is going to do with the way that Norby is hiring is he's taking good talent. By the way, Norby was a well-respected exec. Like he was at ESPN for 40 years. And they essentially, I don't know the whole story, but it seems like they sided with Pat, who's a 33-year-old kicker who's very lucrative.
Punter, Zach,
Punter. He kicked a little bit, right?
He did. You're
He
right.
did
Yeah.
some plays kicking, but he was a punter. Lucrative, like that's not meant to be a shot at Pat, but it's like typically that's not what happens, right? And so Norby, very knowledgeable, well respected, is getting other well respected guys from ESPN to start building something. I do think it's a yellow flag. I wouldn't say it's like ESPN's in a lot of trouble, but I think we've been saying it for months now, and I think others have been saying it too. Like ESPN kind of feels like a ship with a couple of holes that are taking on water. And I don't think it's in danger of sinking yet. I don't think it's anywhere close to that. But I don't like if I'm an investor, I don't love it.
Yeah, no, I think you're correct. To me, it's kind of like Big Ten recruiting versus SEC recruiting. Like the goal here is not to completely surpass ESPN and destroy them. They're not going to die. They have too much backing from Disney and they have too much history. Like they're not going to die altogether. You can't destroy them. But what you can do is you can offer an alternative to, consumers to, watch content that is not, so much SEC bias, right? Watch it in such a way that, they give equal representation to kind of all parties. And CBS Sports has done this to an extent. I
Yep.
enjoy some of CBS Sports content, but they don't really have like, you know, on channel programming like ESPN does. Like they have their app, they have their CBS Sports headquarters, I think it is, where it's kind of sports all day. But at the end of the day, like it's not like that, to where it's kind of like ESPN. They have a podcast or two that does well, but overall, I think at the end of the day here, the most important thing to me is that ESPN seems to be getting weaker, which I think weakens the SEC overall, because one of the biggest pluses that the SEC has is they have pretty much an entire sports media, sports network that is backing them in everything they do. And they do not just do college football, they do NFL, they do a lot of other different things. And I mean, call me a conspiracy theorist, but everything that group does, football wise, I believe is rooted in propping up the SEC, because the SEC is their biggest money grab in college football. I mean, they literally have nothing else but SEC and ACC, and ESPN Plus works well for them. They have some other smaller schools, but I mean, if we're being honest here, the big money grabber is not ACC, it's not, ESPN Plus, it's SEC football.
Yep. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'll just end it with this, and you can answer this really quick, but do you think ESPN getting weaker also weakens the SEC?
It depends. Like, if FanDuel is going to compete with ESPN, like, are they going to offer similar money to the SEC? Because I'll tell you who they're not going to get is the Big Ten and maybe the Big 12, but like, I think the Big Ten is really rooted in CBS, NBC, and Fox, and like, those deals are too sweet for them to, I think, to get anything from FanDuel at this point. So I could see it in some ways. I could see it weakening them. I could also see it actually being a benefit, because maybe it's another avenue of exposure for the SEC. I think it's too early to tell.
Yeah, I think it's very early processes, but yeah, I think you're right. Like, we are seeing signs of it right now. It's not going to happen overnight, but
yeah,
2-3 years from now, like, we could see FanDuel, and not just FanDuel, maybe somebody else gets up there and goes higher. So
yeah, Pit Snipe Husker had a good point here, and I wanted to bring it up. FanDuel has gambling money. They're not just a media conglomerate. I think they got deep enough pockets to build in a challenger. I think that's a good thought. Like, this is not this is not like an upstart company. Like, they got some cash to play with.
yeah, and that was kind of what I was getting to when I said, like, they built themselves off of this gambling money, and now they're creating a sports media conglomerate or a sports media network, whatever you want to call it. And ESPN tried to do it the other way around, which has not been working. Like, you go check the numbers for ESPN Bet. It is tanking. It is doing terrible at this point, and they're going to have to stop it at some point, or just keep funneling money into it, and it's not going to go well. So, I think that's a conversation for another day, ESPN Bet. But anyway, I said I would put some trash to the SEC in there, and I gave us a trash to the SEC subject. Was that good enough, Zach?
I mean, I think we should just go like 3 hours on trashing the SEC. I know John would be happy about that.
Don't do 3 hours. Philip is going to be so happy if we go 3 hours. That's when Dylan comes on. That's when Dylan.
It's true.
All right, let's get to our next. Trojan Fight was asking about this, so we had it in here, Trojan Fight. We weren't ignoring your question. I just knew we were going to get to it. Jed Fish, he had some comments on kickoff times. So essentially, I'll read this here. If you're listening on podcast, here is his entire comment. It says, I definitely feel as if the Big Ten or the TV partners need to really consider if you're playing from the West Coast to the East Coast, and if you're going 3 time zones, you should not kick off before noon. Your body clock... you should not kick off before noon, your body clock time, so 3 p.m. East Coast, and then I think you're going to the other way. You should not kick off after 5 p.m., which would be 8 p.m. East Coast time, body time. As long as you can live in those windows, then I don't think anyone should be talking about travel. So essentially what Jed Fish is saying here is that if you are Washington and you're going over to play Rutgers, which happened this year, correct? If you are Washington and you were heading over to Rutgers to play them, he is advocating that you should play in some time frame between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. I'll be honest, I understand the 3 p.m. a little bit more, like, and I don't think it's that hard. I think, like, it happened with Penn State too. Like they played Penn State in the whiteout. That game started, I think, at 7:30. I get the 3 p.m. I don't get the after 5 p.m. Like I understand, maybe it's no longer daylight and your body clock thinks it is daylight. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's, kind of a little strange, but I think at the very least, if you're a coach from the West Coast here, you're advocating more for, if we're going to the East Coast, no games before 3 o'clock. Like 3 o'clock
Yeah.
or later is what's preferred. And I can understand that. Now, I also have thoughts about Jed Fish and making these comments. Zach, I think you have some. So, does Jed Fish have a point here? Is he right?
I think to the 8 p.m. or the 5 p.m. I think he's talking about East Coast teams traveling to the West, right? Because if you kick off 5 p.m. Pacific, which I can understand because you're kicking off at 8 p.m. Pacific time.
Yeah.
Like that's like your body clocks. It's 11 p.m. East Coast. Like,
yeah.
If you think about it, like Ohio State going to Oregon and playing at 7:30, like it was 10:30.
Yeah.
East Coast time. So
yeah, you're right. I got that mixed up. I apologize. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. So I think all of Jed Fish's points are valid. I think they're all valid. The dude needs to focus on his team and getting better. Like you guys just went 6-7 and a lot of the games you lost weren't because of travel. Like, let Ryan Day talk about that. Let Dan Lanning talk about that. Dude, you need to shut your mouth and just get to work. Like, sorry, but
yeah, I mean,
stop.
I am one of those people that I do understand a little bit more. Like if they get added, like if they get asked a pointed question, like I don't think the guy should just be like, well, I can't talk about that. Like I do appreciate that they have answers, but I do think, so some kind of caveat at the end of like, but that's not the reason we lost. Like and to be fair, I didn't listen to the entire episode, so Jed Fish could have said that. But some kind of caveat. But like, that's not the reason we lost. Yeah, it stinks time wise, but at the end of the day, like if we really want to win games on the East Coast, then we just need to play better.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and there's a sense. It's one of those things where. And maybe it's a little political, but sometimes you say things and you don't have the cachet to say it and have it mean anything yet. Like Jed Fish is new to the conference. By the way, he left his team high and dry. So like this is very different. Like, I mean, to be fair, it's very different if it's Kalen DeBoer complaining about this. And he's still with Washington because he's been there for a while. He's in the new conference. He's adjusted. It's like, it's not good. I get that Jed Fish was in the Pac-12, like is going from Pac-12 team to a former Pac-12 team. I get that. But you don't have the cachet or the influence yet to make a statement like this. Like if Kirk Ferentz says it, I'm listening. Because he's been in the conference for 23 years or 26 years, something like that.
Right.
He's the elder statesman of the conference. If Ryan Day says it, I know people like to get on him for saying things because people think he's complaining. He's not, by the way. But like, I'm listening because he just won a national championship, but he's also like he's the face of the league right now, right? If Jim Harbaugh, like we all made fun of Jim Harbaugh, but like when Jim Harbaugh was here, we would listen because Harbaugh had been here for a while and he's a senior coach. Jed Fish has like no influence. And quite honestly, the way he left Arizona, like that taints everything right now for him. And then his on-field performance doesn't help him either. So I think his message is right. I just wish he would kind of stay in his lane. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it is hard for somebody who lost every single road game last year to comment on this, right? Like I do think if nobody from the West Coast was winning, maybe he does have the right to say that, but I hear what you're saying. Like this is probably more of a Dan Lanning conversation. This is probably more something that he needs to be voicing out there, and trying to talk more about. Do you think so? This whole thing kind of reminded me of the point I made about the ACC and that kind of stuff. Like, to you, do you think that this complaining from Jed Fish, because I think it does, but I'm curious your thoughts, kind of feeds into the idea that teams will eventually have individual contracts or individual agreements, either with that be with the TV company or with the conference, where they can kind of say, like, we want this many games? Because we've already seen it with Ohio State. Like, Ohio State does not want, Penn State too, like, they do not want so many noon games, but Fox continues to put them on noon all the time. If, Washington really wants to, shore these things up for themselves, they could put it in a contract and say, we cannot be scheduled before 3 p.m. If we play teams that are, east of Minnesota or something like that. I don't know, just coming off the top of my head. Do you think that this could help get to that place? Because I just think with so many different teams, with so many different scenarios in the conferences, like, we're going to continue to see issues like this that are an issue for, primarily the West Coast teams. But for being honest, like, Ohio State traveled to the East Coast or to the West Coast, once last year? Like, it's not as big of a deal for them. That was one game.
Yeah.
But for Washington and Oregon, that was a bigger deal, because they played 2 or 3 games on the near East Coast.
Yeah. I think it depends on the team. Like, if we eventually go that route, which I think it is a very interesting proposition that you're putting out there. It really depends on the team, though. Like, what network is going to listen to Washington and say, "Oh yeah, we're going to bend over backwards"? Like, no offense to Washington, but there's only a few teams in college football that can kind of call their shot and be like, yeah, if you don't put us on here, you're going to lose a lot of money. Like, Washington is getting a much better deal from being in the Big Ten than the Big Ten is getting from Washington. Like, no offense to Washington.
Yeah.
And that's true of almost every Big Ten team, except maybe Ohio State, Michigan, I think Oregon right now. And when they're good, I think like USC. But like everybody else in the conference, there's a layer of protection, which is why Washington and Oregon bolted for the Big Ten. Like, the Pac-12 stunk, but also, like, in terms of their agreement, in terms of their leadership. But they understood too, there was a level of financial economic protection that the Big Ten offered. Right. And so if you're going to go to a TV, to a TV market and say, we demand these things, it's hard when they're paying your paycheck and you're not as valuable as other teams in your conference.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you're the only one with this unique need, right? Yes, USC and Oregon and stuff, they have this need too, but it's not the majority of the conference. So you are going to start seeing individual agreements, deals, whether they're contracts or what. Like, we are eventually going to start seeing these for not just travel concerns, but also, how much money is being made. If somebody can keep all of their local money and just share their national money, like all this stuff. Some teams won't want to do that because they don't make as much local money. But you bet for sure that Ohio State is going to want to take their streaming games and not just make them streaming, but also put them on their local television stations, because Ohio State makes too much money for their local television stations for them not to have some of those games. Another point that was brought up here by Trojan Fight, and I think it's a good one. He said, I feel like the Big Ten isn't represented in primetime games on a regular basis. And you are correct, because the primetime window for the Big Ten is Fox Big Noon Kickoff, which is really, really troublesome, I will agree, for USC if they're traveling to Michigan, for Washington if they're traveling to Rutgers. Now, neither of those games were at noon. I'm just saying, if those were to happen at noon and they were to be the primetime game, Fox would take them. That's why Ohio State plays so often at noon. That's why Penn State, their whiteout almost every single year, is not actually their primetime game, because they can't do their whiteout at noon in November, right? So it's it's unfortunate. I mean, obviously Fox is paying the money. Fox gets to decide what they want to decide, but it is unfortunate because, and I'm not trying to say anything bad about these two teams, but neither of these two teams were ranked this last year. So it wasn't exactly a primetime game. Primetime game in rivalry week was Iowa, Wisconsin, right? Or was it rivalry week? I don't think it was rivalry week, but there was a week when it was.
Yeah, Iowa Wisconsin was the NBC game. I think week 2 or week 3. Okay. I think it was week 3. Yeah,
that's a prime time game for those teams, obviously, but you're not gonna draw people to watch Iowa Wisconsin when you have South Carolina Alabama. I don't know if that game was going on at the same time. I'm just using a comparison because those two teams are ranked. And it's not going to bring people over from, ABC to NBC. It's the Big Ten essentially gets themselves out of the way so that way they can, make time for ESPN because ESPN has the teams that are more often ranked and more often have the better records because they only play 8 conference games. And there is an SEC bias that puts them in the AP poll more often than Big Ten teams, which is unfortunate. Yep. So. All right. Last topic here, Zach, and then we'll move on to our head coach rankings. Ari Wasserman put out a list of 10 teams who are facing pivotal seasons in 2025. It is Oklahoma, Alabama, Miami, Michigan, LSU, Washington, Tennessee, Florida, Oregon, and South Carolina. A lot of SEC on this list, but I don't know if this is necessarily an SEC bias because he's not necessarily like ranking the teams, worst to best here. I think he's probably just including a lot of SEC teams because there were a lot of SEC teams that didn't do well last year and need to do better, or they did not, live up to expectations. However, he did put 3 Big Ten teams on here, which are Michigan, Washington, and Oregon. Do you agree that Michigan, Washington, and Oregon are facing pivotal seasons this coming year?
I think I can see Michigan and Washington. Like Michigan's coming off a substandard year. Year 2, Sharon Moore. I think that makes sense. I think Washington, obviously, like we were just giving Jed Fish a bunch of junk, deservedly so. And like I get Washington. I don't get Oregon.
I think it's saying like you had that great year, but you didn't win a playoff game. And like Oregon's not had postseason success. They beat who'd they beat in the 2014 playoffs? They beat somebody in the 2014 playoffs.
Florida State. They beat Florida State.
That's right. But correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe they have another postseason win other than that.
Well, they hadn't been in the playoff since 2014.
Yeah. So Ohio State won that playoff and then they win a national championship. So, not as much pivotal there, but your first time back to the playoffs and, you're down 34-0. Like I could see that scenario, not like you need to do well in the Big Ten, but like you need to get to the playoffs and win a game or two. Like that's going to be pivotal for Dan Lanning to do. But I'm with you. Like I don't necessarily agree with it because I don't think Oregon fans are upset with Dan Lanning. Like, yes, they want to do well and they want to, win something, but you talk to an Oregon fan, most Oregon fans are pretty confident, which they should be. I think they're in a good position. They need to get over the hump.
Yeah. Well, and they ran into a buzzsaw. But like if the Rose Bowl is enough to make any team feel like it was a failure of a season. Right. But the reality, they won a Big Ten championship. They beat every power team in the conference. Like they beat Ohio State, they beat Penn State, they beat Michigan.
Right.
Like, I don't like. I get that they're resetting things, but like Dan Lanning, I mean, you look at his first 3 years at Oregon, right? He was kind of not rebuilding the roster, but I mean, he's kind of taken recruiting to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that's the money, Phil Knight.
Right.
But I don't know. I get he's got to win a playoff game, but there's a real difference between he's got to win a playoff game or else he's getting fired versus he's got to win a playoff game because.
Yeah, for like relevancy, right?
Yeah.
Like if you want to be the elite big dog that you say you are, like you need to win a playoff game. You
Yeah.
can't just have one playoff win when the playoff has been around for 11 years, 10 years. This is the 11th year. You can't just only have one in 10 years and say we're an elite team. Now, obviously that is, a little skewed. I remember I sent out a tweet that said that James Franklin had more playoff wins than Dan Lanning, and I got some pushback from it, obviously from Oregon fans. They weren't happy about that, but I did it more so to kind of highlight the scenario we're in now, where Oregon gets a bye, and that's supposed to be good for them, but because the seeding is so screwed up, they faced Ohio State in their very first game, who it was the only team that really gave them Wisconsin gave them a good game. Boise State did too, but the team in the conference that gave them the best game, they had to face in their very first round of the playoff, and that's unfortunate. The other thing I wanted to ask here was, what other teams, Zach, do you believe are facing a pivotal year in the Big Ten this year? Pitt Snipe Husker has already mentioned his Nebraska Huskers. He thinks are probably maybe 11 or 12. Mish is saying Oregon over USC, question mark. There's some other teams that are on there. I think you could say Penn State. If you're using that Oregon argument to say they need to win they need to win a playoff game. You could probably say the same thing with James Franklin this year, and they are in a pivotal moment. What are your thoughts here?
Wisconsin. Like, Luke Fickell was supposed to be like the savior.
Yeah.
They fired a decent head coach for him. And they broke their bowl streak. It's been a disaster. So I can't believe it's not like top 5, because I think the way people viewed Wisconsin is that like they're a dark horse playoff contender, so like most years, and now like they're forget playoff. It's like, are they going to make a bowl game?
I believe I saw these numbers at one point. They were from a couple years ago, so I don't know if they still hold true now. But back in the 14 playoff, the team that would have made the playoffs back when the 14 playoff started, if it would have started as a 12-team playoff, you know who the team that would have made the playoffs the second most was behind Ohio State in the Big Ten?
Wisconsin.
It would have been Wisconsin. Penn State was up there as well, but Penn State didn't really start seeing those results until, 2016, 2017. And there were even some years in there where they wouldn't have been eligible or not eligible for it. They wouldn't have made it. Wisconsin, they were really, really good under Brett Bielema. And even after that, Paul Chryst, and, there's rumors about Barry Alvarez and how he was kind of running the program and stuff like that. I get that. But overall, like before Luke Fickell came, like, They were nationally relevant, whether people wanted to admit it or not. We would have been talking about Paul Chryst as kind of an underrated coach back then, kind of like we talk about Brett Bielema now, if we had the podcast back then. True or false?
Yeah, I think you could see that Paul Chryst was starting to decline. The last couple of years were not. And so, but yeah, his first few years, 10-win seasons, Big Ten championship appearances, top 10 finishes. They were really good under Chryst for a long time.
Let me ask about one more team, and then we'll get to head coach rankings. Indiana. Should Indiana be on this list? I say yes.
Yes. Yeah.
I say yes because if Indiana does not win 9 games this year, probably 10, Indiana fans and us will know everything. Like we will know, right? But if they do not, the national media will have a field day with this and start calling Kirk Cinetti Mel Tucker 2.0. Oh, he just had one magical season. Portal King. He's not going to Mike Norvell it, obviously. But as far as I'm concerned, like, it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be a pivotal season for Indiana. They should be building off what they had. But at the end of the day, Chris.
Sorry, that's just too good to not.
I think national media wise, like they are going to be foaming at the mouth to try and tear Indiana apart because Indiana really made it difficult for the SEC last year, and they don't like that happened. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think Indiana is like a silent, secret enemy right now of the SEC and who they're going to try to go up against.
Yeah, I feel like they're an honorable mention. I think I look at most of the teams on here, and I see Ari Wasserman's point. Oregon, I don't. I see it, but I don't. I'd have Indiana above Oregon, but I think the top three make a lot of sense. Oklahoma, Alabama, Miami. I think LSU makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of questions around Brian Kelly. Tennessee, maybe I don't see it as much, but like I see those, and like if Indiana goes 7-5, it's like, okay, like Cignetti had a step back, but like they're still decent. If Oklahoma or Alabama goes 8-4, it's, disaster for those teams. Miami, if they slip back and they underachieve, the Mario Cristobal era has been awful. And I know those are the top three. I shouldn't say awful, but like his first year was not great. And then this past year was a disappointment. So I see what you're saying. I don't know. I'd probably have them in honorable mention category.
All right, let's rank them really fast. The teams we mentioned, obviously Michigan, Washington, and Oregon were on the list. The teams we mentioned outside of them were Wisconsin and Indiana. Penn State was mentioned, and USC was mentioned. Is there another one that I'm missing?
Nebraska
was mentioned. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So, most pivotal season next year, we agree both Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Wisconsin number one. I think second is probably Michigan, just because they ended things well, but you want to see that continue under Sherrone Moore. Like, you want to believe he figured out he's going to do a really good job, number one. And number two, like, you want to see something good from Bryce Underwood, which, by the way, if you haven't seen, Bryce Underwood's trash talking LeBron James right now. He is 100% the starter next season. Like, if he's not, it's there's something going on here. But the dude that has enough confidence to trash talk LeBron James, I think he's going to be the starter. If not, boy, does he have a big mouth. Anyway, you agree Michigan number two?
Yeah, I think it's really close between them and Penn State.
Which way do you lean? I could go either way.
I probably lean Michigan, but I think it's pretty slim between those two.
Okay, because we'll go ahead.
Penn State has the Ohio State problem of a year ago, where it's like they have so many pieces back that if they don't achieve, I don't know, at least like a semifinal appearance and win, or like win the conference or beat Ohio State, like if those things don't happen, there's going to be a lot of unhappy fans in Happy Valley.
Unhappy in Happy Valley. You are correct. All right. So 1 Wisconsin, 2 Michigan, 3 Penn State. Our other options are Washington, Oregon, Indiana, USC, Nebraska.
Nebraska 4?
I would say either Nebraska or Washington.
Probably Nebraska. I would think Nebraska just because it's year 3 with Rule.
Okay.
And
then Washington.
What do you think about USC? What do you think?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, USC might be 5. They might be over Washington.
Yeah. And then Washington.
Okay, let's do USC 5, Washington 6, and then Indiana 7, Oregon 8.
Yeah, I like that. That's good.
Okay, so tell me if you feel good about this or not. Wisconsin, Michigan, Penn State, Nebraska, USC, Washington, Indiana, Oregon.
Yeah, that sounds right.
All right, it's going on a graphic tomorrow. Look out for a graphic and like it, and I'm sure somebody will try to ratio me, and if they do, good for them. I still got views. So
yeah.
Which, by the way, did you see the offense rankings that I posted from that Ducks Wire guy?
I did.
That was insane.
Where people were.
He had Indiana I think that he had Indiana 9th or something like that.
Oh boy.
Indiana fans were not happy, as you could imagine. I mean, rightfully so too. I told one of them in the comments. I was like, "Listen, I agree with you." I posted this, but that does not mean I agree with it.
These are not my own opinions.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna put them out there.
His top four were Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Nebraska. Which, like, okay, if Nebraska hits with their wide receivers and Dylan Raiola really improves, like, okay, and the offensive line has the potential, but I think there's others that are more surefire. And also, it really was like, okay, Nebraska won the offseason again, which I also kind of posted for that reason. Anyway, all right, let's get to our head coach rankings. We're going to hit a commercial, everybody, and then we'll be right back. We'll do our head coach rankings. Stay with us. Have you ever wanted to watch all 22 film, that film the coaches watch? Well, now you can. Introducing the Coaches Film Room. Over at Minutes to Sports, former college coach Zach Smith breaks down film of the most relevant teams in college football with a bit of a Big Ten lead. It's not free, so you'll need to sign up for the Colonel tier, which is $25 a month, but I can attest to you that it is far more worth it than that. With about 4 to 8 games per week, this is worth so much more money, not to mention Zach's analysis, making you a smarter football fan. Go check it out. The links are in the description, minutestosports.com. You won't be sorry. Back here on the Big Ten Huddle, I'm going to do my absolute best to remain as locked in as I can here, but the Big Ten tournament game that's going on right now between USC and Purdue is a really good one. So, and we just got off of Illinois and Iowa, and Illinois put up over 100 points. So I'm feeling good about these games. I wanted to do this on Tuesday, but my tire just had to go out. So here we are. We're here on Thursday. All right. Zach and I have done our Big Ten head coach rankings, I think about a month ago. I think it was mid-February when we did those. We are now doing our Big Ten head coach rankings mixed in with our SEC head coach rankings. So we're not going to give you our SEC head coach rankings by themselves, but we are going to put them here on the screen, ingratiated kind of into our Big Ten rankings. Now, Zach and I have already talked through our differences in our Big Ten rankings. If you would like to go and watch that, it's somewhere on YouTube. If I remember after the fact, I'll write it down. I'll link it in the description. So you can watch those. But if you want to hear us talk about the SEC coaches and how we have them ranked, we're going to do that now. Zach, I don't think we can go through and say like this is where every coach is because we have 34 people ranked, but we can kind of do some highlights and go from there. So like for instance, the top 10, I'll say for me, were Georgia, Ohio State, or I should say the coach's name, Kirby Smart, Ryan Day, Dan Lanning, Kalen DeBoer, Steve Sarkisian, James Franklin, Brett Bielema, Kirk Signetti, Josh Heupel, and Brian Kelly. Those were my top 10. Your top 10 was Kirby Smart, Ryan Day. I think I said Ohio State before. I apologize.
Yeah, that's right.
Dan Lanning, Steve Sarkisian, Lane Kiffin, James Franklin, Brett Bielema, Josh Heupel, Brian Kelly, Kalen DeBoer. So we do have some differences there. But let's just go ahead and go straight to the differences, Zach. What are some differences with my list and your list that you want to point out and start discussing?
So I'll get to the one that Philip is already roasting me over, which is Lane Kiffin. And
is that one that you thought later on you were like, oh, I should have changed that?
No, actually, believe it or not. So I don't love that he's here, but you have to understand the context.
We've not made Billy happy, Zach, by the way. No Christmas cards from us, from Billy.
You can't you can justify Ryan Day over Kirby Smart.
You can. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry, I'm just messing.
But if you look at just the context of what Lane Kiffin has done at Ole Miss, who is like people forget Ole Miss historically is not a good job. Like it's not a good job. And like he has them perennially in playoff contention. Like this year, they've been, 3 out of 5 years, they've been ranked 11th or higher. And he's made them into a recruiting powerhouse. Now, that's not to say that there are shortcomings there too, but like he's done it, he did it at the G5 level, like had really good teams at Florida Atlantic. Ole Miss, he's done really well. And just because he says dumb things on Twitter, which he does say dumb things on Twitter, I don't feel like that negates the fact that he's actually been a very good head coach. And while, Philip particularly was saying having Lane Kiffin over Burt is lunacy. Like Brett Bielema is great. Like I really think he's great. And he has not elevated a team this drastically like Lane Kiffin has with Ole Miss. And so I feel like he doesn't get the respect I hate to say deserves, because he deserves respect for being a football coach and being a recruiter. His Twitter game and his trash talk, not so much, but his actual coaching and talent acquisition, which is part of college football, is really impressive.
Yeah, so I wouldn't have linked Lane personally over James Franklin just because I think that Vanderbilt is a worse job than Ole Miss, and I think that James Franklin did similar to what Lane is doing at Ole Miss, albeit for less amount of time. So maybe that needs to be factored in, but that would just be my thought process. So I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying for me personally there.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair.
I do think that, Ole Miss gets some benefit of not playing the hardest schedules in the world, and that has helped out Lane Kiffin. Like their out of conference last year was Furman, Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, and Georgia Southern.
Yep.
Like it's not great, and historically they have not played very difficult hard conferences. To me, Lane Kiffin is, and this is just me once again, Lane Kiffin is the off-brand version of Kirk Cinetti. Now, Kirk Cinetti only did it for 1 year, and I do think that is probably a good argument if you were going to make that argument. But as far as I'm concerned, like Lane Kiffin has had teams that should go 11-1, that should go 10-2 because of his NIL resources and how he utilizes them to get talent. But that doesn't always happen. Like you look at last year, he was 9-3, and they went to a bowl game and beat Duke, who had basically their entire team in the transfer portal because they're Duke, and anybody that's good is leaving to go someplace better. So I hear what you're saying, and I do think that there is definitely a discussion needed about what Ole Miss used to be. But at the same time, I also look at coaches in the Big Ten and say, what other coaches have done similar things to that? To me, I put Lane Kiffin on the same level as PJ Fleck because I think Lane Kiffin has just done at Ole Miss what PJ Fleck would probably do at Ole Miss. I know that's kind of crazy to say, but hear me out. Like, PJ Fleck has assembled NFL talent at a high rate at Minnesota. They have played 9 conference games. They typically have a not super difficult. It's not like they're playing Georgia in the out of conference, but they are scheduling a tough out of conference team more often than not in those years. And so you have Minnesota, who's winning 7 or 8 games a year, compared to Ole Miss, who is winning 9 or 10 games a year. Well, you take one of those conference games away and put Georgia Southern in it. Minnesota is similar to Ole Miss in there. So I'm not trying to disparage Lane Kiffin here because I do think that PJ Fleck is a good coach, but if I'm looking at a Big Ten coach and if I'm looking at an SEC coach and I say, who is Lane Kiffin like? It feels like you're saying Lane Kiffin is like James Franklin, which I can see some similarities there. But when you take into account all the context of conference games and everything else, he seems more like a PJ Fleck than a James Franklin to me, which feel free to push back on. I'm not saying that I'm totally right, but that's just the way I ranked Lane Kiffin personally.
And I think that's fair. I think Lane Kiffin's polarizing. I would just push on 2 things. One, talent acquisition is part of this. Like, it's why Dan Lanning is 3rd probably on both of our lists. Because, like, I think you can make a really strong case for a couple of coaches over Dan Lanning. That was actually the one that I was having the most trouble with over the past 48 hours.
Okay.
But talent acquisition is part of it. So people saying, well, Burt does less with more and PJ Fleck does less with more. Yes and no. Because part of what a college coach is supposed to do is acquire talent. And like Lane Kiffin has been a big part of the NIL resources being drummed up. So you have to account for that. The other thing, before.
Can I comment on that really, really quick, and then we'll get to your second point? I just want to comment really quick.
Mm-hmm.
The way I look at it, that's a little bit different, and I think you make a great point about, acquiring talent and stuff like that. PJ Fleck is also not in a hotbed of the South like Lane Kiffin is.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so I do think that plays a part in it. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying I think that plays a part in it. Go ahead with your second point. Sorry.
Right. And I'm not saying it's everything, but right. I think that it's good to point out. I think the other thing, and this is why I have him slightly ahead of James Franklin, is that I've seen Ole Miss take Penn State to the woodshed in a bowl game recently. They beat Penn State 38-25. Penn State was ranked ahead of Ole Miss at that point. Now, granted, it's a bowl game, but I think everybody played, and I mean, it wasn't as, I don't think it was as close as well, it was close at halftime, but then Ole Miss really pulled away and showed that they were the better team. And I don't know, that lasts in my memory. So I think Lane is polarizing. And so I think out of the top 10 makes sense. I think in the top 5, like, I think you can make a case either way.
Yeah. I would say, I forget what I was going to say. Anyway, we can move on to the next one. I do want to talk about Steve.
Sorry. I was just going to say, did Penn State have a bunch of opt-outs in that game? I didn't think they did, but
I don't remember, to be honest.
Yeah, if they did, that's my
thing.
bad.
The thing I was going to say is I personally, I don't take into account single game scenarios and say this coach is better than this coach because they beat him. Now, if they're like right next to each other, maybe I do, but to me, like, I think head coaching is so much more than just like who won that game, right?
Yeah,
like
that's fair.
Illinois barely beat. I shouldn't say barely beat. They were in a close game with South Carolina, but you could tell on that game, Brett Bielema is 10 times the coach that Shane Beamer is. Like, yes, it was a close game, but they are not close in head coaching on the field and everything else. Like, Brett Bielema is easily a better coach than Shane Beamer, in pretty much every way, in my opinion. So, the other one I want to talk about was Steve Sarkisian. Now, you and I have him pretty similar. I have said this before. I want to get your thoughts on it because I've gotten pushback, but everybody that I've explained it to has said, well, that makes sense. Steve Sarkisian is James Franklin. He's the SEC version of James Franklin. And people will tell me, well, Steve Sarkisian went to the playoffs, the 14 playoffs. Yes, he went to the 14 playoffs out of the Big 12. Sonny Dykes did the same thing. Sonny Dykes went to the national championship. We don't list Sonny Dykes in the top 25 of coaches because he had one good season and was able to put it all together. Congrats to him. Great job. And Steve Sarkisian has shown, more progression. So that's why I have him higher up. But to me, like we say, I don't know if we say, because I don't say it as much, but I know other people say it, James Franklin can't win the big games. Neither can Steve Sarkisian. Like, name me a big game that Steve Sarkisian has won. Texas A&M, congrats. You beat Mike Elko. He is, where's he at on my list? He is 28th. Like, good job. You should beat Mike Elko. That should not be a super tough scenario for you, especially when you're Texas. You have the unlimited NIL resources that you have, and you live in the hotbed that you do of recruiting. Agree or disagree, Steve Sarkisian is James Franklin.
Yeah, which, by the way, like James Franklin's a really good coach. So it's like he's in your top 5, he's in my top 4. So, but I see where you're coming from, and I think I largely agree.
Yeah, he's in my. We have the same. He's 6 for both of us.
Oh, you mean Franklin? Yeah.
Oh, you're talking Sark. Sorry.
Yeah. Like Sark, I like he's turned it up, and like he beat Alabama. Like that was the big thing in last year. Like that's his big marquee victory. Franklin's was 2016 Ohio State, and so it's been a while.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying is like neither one necessarily can break the can't win big games mold, right?
Yeah.
But because Steve Sarkisian's in the SEC, that's what people say. To me, anytime I do a coach's rankings, I have Steve Sarkisian and James Franklin. I have them right next to each other. I have Steve Sarkisian barely above because I think Steve Sarkisian, he went to the SEC championship game, stuff like that. But to me, there's not much of a difference between the two.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's very fair.
All right, that's the one I wanted to bring up. Which SEC coach do you want to bring up next?
Oh gosh. So I was very torn on Mark Stoops.
Oh yeah, you tell me that.
Yeah. So I actually initially had Stoops like I think in the 30s. And that's where you have him 31. And then I realized I think I was looking there was some recency bias as I was looking at his records. Like, you want to talk about terrible jobs? The Kentucky job sucks. Like, it's an awful job. He has been there for 12 years and like is almost at the cusp of 500 for his entire tenure, which that probably sounds terrible, but it's like he's got a couple of top 25 finishes. He's got 4 bowl wins. Like it's actually kind of impressive what he's done. And because of that, I felt like I had to give him a bump despite the fact that this year they were terrible. And again, he's done well against Big Ten coaches in bowl games, which again, it's not the main thing, but like he's beaten Iowa, like he's beaten Kirk Ferentz. I believe he beat James Franklin in the Citrus Bowl. He beat James Franklin in the Citrus Bowl back in 2019. So like he has a track record of beating coaches that are way higher on our list. And this is with, Kentucky does not have the same resources as Penn State. So I felt like the recency bias made me feel like he's a terrible coach. I think actually looking at the whole picture, I'm like, man, I think Mark Stoops is actually probably a little bit better than I give him credit for.
That makes sense. Yeah, I probably should have Mark Stoops higher. I probably should have him up probably closer to where you have him. I would probably rank him probably right there in that Jonathan Smith, Washington range because he has taken a team in Kentucky to those heights, but I probably wouldn't rank him as high just because he wasn't consistently there. Like he had 10-win seasons, but you look back on those seasons, like he lost to Georgia, and then he did beat Florida, I think in 2021, and then he lost to Mississippi State that year. So
yeah,
I really I get having a good season, but at the same time, it's also I don't know, win the games you're supposed to win. If you have a big win over Florida, you should be able to, do what Kirk Cignetti did and win the games you're supposed to win. But then you go lose to Mississippi State. So yeah, I guess when I take that into account and probably think about it a little bit more, I probably have him somewhere around Sherrone Moore, which, yes, I know if you're a Michigan fan, you hate me because of Sherrone Moore. Go back and watch the other episode. I explained all of it. I don't expect you to agree, but if I'm being honest, those are my thoughts. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. So yeah, no, I think that's a good one to bring up. Anything else on Mark Stoops?
Mm-mm.
All right, other one. I don't really want to talk about the bottom all that much.
Mississippi State sucks. There, we did it.
We did. You're higher on Eli Drinkowitz than I am. You have Eli Drinkowitz up above Kirk Ferentz. I have Eli Drinkowitz right there with Lincoln Riley. I think Eli Drinkowitz is kind of like a Lincoln Riley personally, just not the success at Oklahoma because Eli Drinkowitz never went there. But as far as I'm concerned, he had one good year at Missouri. Just like Lincoln Riley had one good year at USC, and he's had some pretty easy schedules other years, so he's inflated his wins a bit. But anytime, what did he play Alabama this year? He lost 41-3 or something like that. I don't know. It was really bad score. So yeah, I mean, What do you think on Eli Drinkowitz?
Yeah, I'm probably a bit higher on coaches that take bad jobs and make them respectable. So if I think that I'm realizing that this is the trend is like I tend to overrate coaches that have done well, like have done better than expected at bad jobs. And like I don't think Missouri's a great job. But he's had 10-win seasons, went to a New Year's Six Bowl in 2023. So I think that's probably it. I'm not necessarily married to that one. So that pick.
Let's see. Mish says I would have Loxley 34. Besides that, it's solid. Yeah, I mean we do have to give Loxley some credit for like recruiting and stuff like that, but yeah, I mean we've talked down Mike Loxley quite a bit on this show, so I think he's on the hot seat this year.
Yeah. I mean, I hear the Loxley talk. What's the name of the coach at Mississippi State? Jeff Lebby. My gosh,
he's terrible.
Oh,
terrible. Like now Mississippi State is also an impossible job to win at.
Yeah,
but still,
yeah.
It's bad. Billy Tuesday says Purdue has a new coach. Sorry, this was the one I meant to get. John said, "How is Purdue not dead last?" I will say, like Barry Odom, I do like he had a couple okay years at Missouri before he got canned there, and then he went to UNLV, did well at UNLV. Like I think he got 10 wins this past season. So, yeah, I mean, I think some people take those jobs and just like kind of disregard them and act like they don't matter. But I still think they matter. I still think going to a UNLV and winning 10 games there matters, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I have Barry Odom low, but I explained it on our last show with rankings. I just want to see how he does at Purdue. But that being said, I think you do have to take into account what has this person already accomplished. Right. Which I think this goes into like, I think if you actually look at the list that like the college lists, especially in the Big Ten, there's a lot of really good coaches. And there's a lot of coaches that we think are going to be good, but they're unproven.
Yes. I think of like Jed Fish and Jonathan Smith. Those come to my mind with those because they got programs that were smaller, Arizona and Oregon State, to top 15 seasons. But they've not done that. Michigan State was 5-7 and Washington was 6-6. Yeah. Like I think they should be better, but also like I was just talking to somebody about this with Big Ten basketball the other day. Like the Big Ten's a really good conference. The Big Ten is the best conference there is in college football right now. And SEC fans will argue with me on that, but let's see what happens when you play 9 conference games. And that's what the Big Ten is doing. So just because a coach goes 6-6 in the Big Ten doesn't, like what have we heard from SEC for years? Your record is not who you are, right? Mm-hmm. Like 6-6 in the Big Ten is not exactly, actually 6-6. it's better than what people give it credit for. Yeah. David Greenshield says, JR Zach, when's the next call-in show? What do we say?
Monday.
17th? Yeah, Monday. Yes. I forgot to mention that at the top of the episode. I apologize.
Yeah.
Monday, the 17th at 9:00, correct?
Yeah. And if you want to be able to call in, membership, make sure you hit that membership. Monday for members. Yeah.
Yes.
Yankees got it. Yankees got it.
Yankee, I would love to go on and on about Sherrod Moore. But I talked about it so much on the other episode. You just have to go watch the other episode. I get it.
He probably has watched it. So
yeah, I get it. Yeah, you got a bone to pick. I got it. But hey, that's why we have Zach on this podcast, because Zach is not the homer that I am.
It's debatable, but
oh, he says he listens to them all. Okay, so he already listened. Okay, so he's just giving me a hard time. Thanks, Yankee. Always appreciate it. All right. Zach, is there anything else coach rankings wise you want to bring up before we are done here? I think pretty much everything else we're pretty close on. Like we can talk about
Yeah.
Vanderbilt if we want. I mean, I'm a little bit higher on Sam Pittman than you are, but I mean you're higher on Brent Venables than I am. I guess we could talk about that if we want to, but
Not by much.
I was gonna say it's what is that?
It's
27
27th.
to 33. Oh, the other thing. If you look at these rankings, and I did it for my rankings and I did it for Zach's rankings, if you add up all the rankings and everything and take the average of all those rankings in both of these lists, so you can't say my list is, biased or whatever. In both of these lists, the average ranking of Big Ten coaches is above the average ranking of the SEC coaches, which, Zach, to me, means the Big Ten has better coaches than the SEC. Agree or disagree?
I absolutely agree. I think I texted you that. I'm like, man, after you get to a certain point, the SEC sucks.
Yeah, I think you said after Beamer.
Yeah, and even
Which makes
Beamer's
sense
not that
because you
impressive.
went like 7 straight Big Ten coaches after Beamer.
Yeah. Well,
Except for
because
Stoops.
yeah, it was 7 and then I moved Stoops, but it's like, and part of it, I feel like Shiano, Moore, Riley, Rule, Fickle, Fish, Jonathan Smith, like there's inconsistencies there, but man, like they all have at least one really good season under their belt, either at their current school or before. And like, listen, Clark Lee had his big season at Vandy this year, and it was 7-6. It's like, yay! And I know Vandy's a tough place, but like Mark Stoops got a 10-win season. Clark Lee's like 7-6. Like James Franklin got 9 multiple times at Vandy. So like, who cares? Brett Venables 6-7. Yay! Like, Billy Napier, DJ Lagway makes him look like a top 25 team. Okay, you still only won 7 games. I don't care. Sam Pittman had one good year. Sorry, I'm just like, these coaches.
If you would like to get further thoughts on our head coach rankings, you can call in the call-in show on Monday night.
Yes,
at 9 p.m. Members only, so you'll have to become a member of the channel. Zach, we appreciate everybody being here. Sunday night, correct? You'll be here?
Yes. Can I, real quick before we head out, Pitt Snipe, what are we talking about? Prestigious bloodline. I have a prestigious bloodline apparently.
Is Guggenheim royalty or something?
Well, there's a museum, but I don't.
Go.
But I have one less G than the famous Guggenheims. Is that what you're referring to, Pitt Snipe? Is that what you're? Oh, it's $1 million handle. I had to ask Guggenheim. Yeah. Yeah. So Guggenheim, the Guggenheim Museum is Gugg. And my last name is not sadly. I'm proud of my last name, but it's Gug. So
Yankees saying, did you guys ever talk about Ohio State Michigan game and too many men on the field at the end? Does that ever come up with Ryan Day? I don't know what you're talking about with too many men on the field.
Didn't he?
Oh, we had to call that timeout.
Yeah.
He didn't have. Okay, it wasn't like Marcus Freeman where it was. Where it happened. No, I think we talked about that after the game. Like that was one of the reasons why I was like, you gave up play calling to be a better head coach, and you can't even get the right number of guys on the field. So it's all blur. It's all blur to me now, Yankee. He won a national championship. So
yeah, I think we talked about it to the point where for 22 days we said fire Ryan Day, and then we were like, oh, you can do that. Cool.
We were a much different podcast host at that point in time.
Hashtag we are homers. We try not to be, but yeah.
Listen, I've been told that sometimes our emotion is what people like on the podcast. So if we show a little bit of emotion, I think that works out. So
yep.
All right, Zach. Anything else you want to get to before we get out of here?
No, this is fun, man. I love. Just so you guys know, I love yucking it up with you guys in the chat. It's really fun. Thanks for being here. Absolute blast. So JR, I'm glad that you got your tire fixed.
I am too. It needed to be fixed because I I'm gonna be driving around with a donut on. That's no fun. It's no fun. No donut. All right. So thank you everybody for being here. We appreciate it. We will be live again Sunday night, 9 o'clock. I will also be going live for Big Ten After Dark on Sunday at 8 o'clock. We'll get the bracket and everything. I think I'm gonna have Burke on with me Sunday night. I need to confirm with him, but him and I will go through the entire bracket and try to pick all the games and everything like that. Get done within an hour, so that way I can be over here at 9 o'clock. Monday night, we will have a call-in show for the members. Tuesday night, we'll have another show, and then we'll have After Darks all throughout the tournament. If there is a Big Ten game being played on that day of the tournament, we will go live that night, times pending and stuff like that. But if there is a Big Ten game that day, we will go live that night to at least talk about that one game. I'm going to see if Kent can do it with me at least a couple times, because I'm sure he'll have fun with the March Madness stuff and everything, and we'll have fun yucking it up a little bit. So thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.